This is Walter Bosley, and I'll be reading a selection from The Secret Message of Jules Verne, Decoding His Masonic Rosicrucian and Occult Writings by MICHEL LAMY. Chapter 10, Jules Verne and the Hollow Earth. The Secrets of the Green Ray. We have seen that Bram Stoker, author of Dracula, was exposed to the same inspiration as Jules Verne, the history and legends of vampirism, the mystic teachings that were honored by the Golden Dawn and other secret societies. Bram Stoker was also the author of a novel entitled Jewel of the Seven Stars, whose meaning was completely distorted in a recent film that transformed it into a mediocre thriller. The entire story revolves around a mysterious sarcophagus brought back from Egypt by an archaeologist named Trelawney. This treasure is accompanied by, quoting, a low table of green stone with red veins in it, like bloodstone. The feet were fashioned like the paws of a jackal, and round each leg was twined a full-throated snake wrought exquisitely in pure gold. End quote. Trelawney also brings back a coffer of green stone, a mummified hand with 7 fingers, and several other objects, including 7 lamps, on each of which appears a depiction of one of the 7 forms of the Egyptian goddess Hathor. All these objects came from a lost vale known as the Valley of the Sorcerer, and had been collected from a tomb carved into a cliff where the mummy of Queen Tera had been discovered. It seems her double remains linked to the mummy, and apparently feeds on blood. Also connected to this adventure is a blood-red ruby carved in the form of a scarab and glittering with 7 seven-pointed stars corresponding to the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. The Ka mentioned in Egyptian religion is nothing other than the double we have been discussing, the abstract personality imbued with all the characteristics of the individual and endowed with an independent existence. The Ka is inhabited by the Ba, or soul, which animates it. The Ka can leave the tomb, find the individual's body, and reanimate it. Connected to the Ka are the Ku, spiritual intelligence or mind. It takes the form of a luminous, intangible, radiant body. And the Seken, or power, of a man, his vital force or energy personified. All these elements, together with the Kaibit, or shadow, the Ren, or name, the Kat, or physical body, and the Ab, the heart, which is the seat of life, form the different components of the body. In the story, the so-called vampire of Queen Tera eventually takes possession of the archaeologist's body, and the tale comes to a close with a strange greenish radiance. This truly provides a nice finishing touch to the author's theories about vampirism. It also invites us to take a closer look at Egypt, for the emphasis on green radiance in The Jewel of the Seven Stars is reminiscent of the green lion of the alchemists, which is said to fix the volatile blood. Jean-Louis Bernard, specialist on Egypt, tells us that the green ray turns red when materialized in the blood. Just what is this mysterious ray connected to the specter, to the green face of Osiris? Jean-Louis Bernard writes, quoting, the phosphorescent power about which Greek mythology speaks is the mysterious green radiance, which is the mystery of both life and death. This green ray was one of the secrets of the Egyptian temples as a legacy to Osiris, the god with the green face. It had the effect of stimulating healthy cells to transform, but it also accelerated the decomposition of unhealthy cells. The green goddess Hathor concentrates the divine force into a green ray that is the essence of biological life in all nature's kingdom. End quote. Jean-Louis Bernard notes that in its raw and highly intensified and concentrated state, the green ray is intolerable. We can recall that green is the traditional color of dragons, guardians of the threshold, and is the symbol of eternal youth. Jean-Pierre Bayard writes, quoting, The neophyte who dies to profane life in order to be reborn in a higher form is transfigured. This inner light illuminates him, and we can consider the causes for his physical rejuvenation. The body is merely the mirror of the soul. The restoration of the inner being therefore becomes a fountain of youth, but this green color is the corollary to the individual's resurrection on a human or on a cosmic plane." End quote. This should be enough evidence to persuade us of the consistency in Bram Stoker's work. We should also be able to find mention of the green ray in the work of Verne. In The Castle of the Carpathians, one passage discussing a large ray commands our attention in this regard. Quoting, "What hearth produced this powerful light, whose radiations traveled in large sheets across the surface of the Orgal Plateau? What furnace released this photogenic source which seemed to set the rocks ablaze and at the same time bathed them in a strange livid grayness? He and the forester have taken on a cadaverous aspect, pale face, dead eyes, hollow sockets, greenish jaws, with a speckled hue, hair resembling the moss which, according to legend, is said to grow on the skulls of hanged men. Having reached the final degree of fright, Dr. Patek's muscles retracted, his hair standing on end, his pupils dilated, his body caught in a tetanus-like stiffness. As the poet of contemplation said, he breathed horror." End quote. This subject, however, was so dear to Jules Verne that he devoted an entire novel to it, titled The Green Ray. Even if Jules Verne depicted it as a natural phenomenon, truly it is our vital ray, another element that can be found in Rosicrucian tradition. In the beginning of the novel, Verne says of two of the main characters, quoting, "By doing good, they had continued the generous traditions of their ancestors. Also, both the picture of health and nary an irregularity in their lives to cause them regret. They were destined to age without growing old, neither in mind nor body." End quote. I leave the reader to discover more about Oliver Sinclair, a very interesting name, the novel's hero, but for our discussion here, I cite this passage from the novel. Quoting, "Have you sometimes observed the sun setting over the horizon of the sea? Yes, of course. Have you followed its descent to just that moment when the upper part of its disk touching the waterline, it is on the verge of disappearing? That's also quite likely, but have you noted that the phenomenon which occurs at the precise moment this radiant star gives off its last ray, if the sky clear of mists is thus a perfect purity, it will not be, as one might think, a red ray that will strike the retina of your eye. It will be a green ray, but a mysterious green, a green that no painter could reproduce on his palette, a green that nature, with all the varied shades of its plants or seas, no matter how limpid, could ever hope to equal. If there is green in paradise, it can only be this shade, which is, no doubt, the true green of hope." End quote. And finally, in this book, Verne writes, quoting, "This green ray is the subject of an old legend. The virtue of this ray is such that he who has seen it will never again be fooled in affairs of the heart, and that he who has been fortunate to see it just once sees clearly into his own heart and that of others." End quote. Bulwer-Lytton, the Rosicrucian master. The green ray is present in a work by another member of the Golden Dawn, Bulwer-Lytton. An extraordinary individual, Edward Charles Bulwer-Lytton, born in 1803, died in 1873, was minister of the colonies under Queen Victoria. He was a descendant of the 17th century alchemist Dr. John Bulwer, who invented, among secret languages, a language for deaf-mutes. Historian Andrew Lang states that Bulwer-Lytton allegedly met Count Saint-Germain in Paris in 1860. He was the author of a very well-known novel called The Last Days of Pompeii, but also wrote Zanoni, a Rosicrucian tale in which a true Rosicrucian sacrifices his physical immortality out of love. This novel takes place in Italy, in Paris, at the end of the 18th century. The sage Zanoni has succeeded in vanquishing death and knows the secret of eternal youth, but he sacrifices himself to save Viola, the woman he loves. The following short passage establishes the relationship to what we have discussed up to now. Quoting, "There may be forms of matter and invisible and impalpable to us as the animalculae in the air we breathe, in the water that plays in yonder basin. Such beings may have passions and powers like our own, as the animalculae to which we have compared them. The monster that lives and dies in a drop of water, carnivorous, insatiable, subsisting on the creatures more minute than himself, is not less deadly in his wrath, less ferocious in his nature, than the tiger of the desert. There may be things around us that would be dangerous and hostile to men if Providence had not placed a wall between them and us, merely by different modifications of matter." End quote. It is curious to note that the heroine of Zanoni is Italian, just like Consuela and Lastia, and is connected to the music world. There is another novel of Bulwer-Lytton that is of particular interest with respect to Jules Verne, The Coming Race. This work describes a race of beings who live beneath the surface of the earth and are superior to humans, both intellectually and technically. The Ana, the name of this race, have long since gone beyond the problem of social struggle and no longer know war. As an energy source, they use a natural power they have developed, called vril, which is nothing other than the green ray. Their world is accessible through a mine, and they claim descent from a Celtic race. Their power is somewhat alarming. They are a subterranean civilization superior to our own, and they possess weapons based on vril that are more powerful than our atomic bombs, and are capable of instantly reducing to ashes a city 2 times the size of London. The Ana are served by robots. One day they will return to the surface, perhaps through an opening located in Iceland, and they will take over the world. Jules Verne and the Journey to the Center of the Earth. Exactly how should we interpret all this? It is hard to avoid recalling a subject dear to both Edgar Allan Poe and Jules Verne. According to Lovecraft, Poe's documentation came from so-called forbidden and unsuspected sources. What appears certain, as Jacques Berger wrote in his preface to the French edition of The Coming Race, is that these sources were included in the documentation of certain secret societies, such as the Golden Dawn. Poe wrote a novel that would serve as great inspiration to Jules Verne, The Adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym, which follows an initiatory outline linked to the internal or infernal world. This story is set in motion by the clandestine departure of a young man who stows away on a vessel as it prepares to weigh anchor. This scenario would have been a vivid reminder to Verne of his similar experience as a youth. Part of this novel takes place underground, and the reverse symbolism of the colors there is representative of this inner world. It should be noted that the word blood is a key to the novel. After numerous adventures Pym experiences on an Antarctic island, where everything is black, and where a maze of caves and corridors is discovered in a world populated by savages whose chief is named Selamun, the novel ends at the South Pole, where Pym dissolves into a kind of gigantic, veiled figure that's white as snow. Jules Verne names this figure, and also one of his novels, the Sphinx of the Ice Fields. Verne actually conceived a sequel to Arthur Gordon Pym's adventures. On September 1st, 1896, he wrote to Hetzel, quoting, "No need to tell you that I am going infinitely farther than Poe." This theme of an inner earth is markedly present in Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth. As we discovered earlier, it is true that Jules Verne was inspired by, some might say that he plagiarized, rather, one of George Sand's novels, Laura, or The Journey in the Crystal. It also seems that he may have used a work that was published in 1721 and recently been reissued by Verdier Editions. Passage du pôle arctique au pôle antarctique par la centre du monde. In other words, passage from the Arctic Pole to the Antarctic Pole through the center of the Earth. In the 1721 work, the regions traversed by the heroes belong to a topsy-turvy world. Fish swim backward and birds make their nests beneath the ground. At the pole, there is an island with 3 points, and its environment is characterized by a zone where the snow gives way to foliage. A lake there is connected to a system of underground canals, roads from a labyrinth that is quite comparable to the one discovered by Arthur Gordon Pym. The final episode portrays a dead man's resurrection, as found in Jules Verne's stories. In this work, we see the hero following a stream back to its source, which turns out to be a very beautiful spring in a cavern hollowed out in one of the mountains bordering the valley. Inside the cave there is a round and very deep hole that is a good span in width, and it gives off a warm vapor. In Journey to the Center of the Earth, the main hero, Axel, is a young man as yet unformed character who has no desire to go on an expedition. It is his fiancée who urges him to join the adventure, saying to him, quoting, "When you return, Axel, you will be a man." End quote. What follows is an extraordinary initiatory journey. As indicated at the start of the 3rd chapter, Marcel Brionne, who devoted long passages to this novel in his book, The Romantic's Germany, The Initiatory Voyage, clearly grasped this aspect of Verne's story. The Hollow Earth. Axel's initiatory journey aside, what we are most interested in here is the theme of the Hollow Earth. Axel gives us the source of this depiction of the terrestrial globe by recalling that theory of an English captain who compared the Earth to a hollow sphere inside of which the air remained luminous because of its pressure, while 2 planetary bodies, Pluto and Proserpine, followed their mysterious orbits. Through the words of Dr. Clawbonny in The Adventures of Captain Hatteras, Jules Verne gives us details about an English captain, Captain Sims, who proposed to attempt this voyage to Humphrey Davy, Humboldt, and Arago, but these scientists refused. Dr. Clawbonny also recalls a legend claiming that an immense opening exists at the poles from which the aurora borealis escapes and through which one can enter into the interior of the globe. Amused smiles generally accompany such theories, yet during the 16th century, the brilliant William Postel stated in his Compendium Cosmographicum, quoting, "Paradise sits below the Arctic Pole," end quote. A theory that played a role in his arrest and death in an Inquisition prison. Victor Hugo viewed this spot as the entrance to hell in his The End of Satan. Buffon imagined the existence of lakes and wide expanses of water beneath the plains and large valleys of that region. Jacques Casanova de Sangault placed paradise at the center of the earth. This is the reason behind his work entitled Icosamrin, or the story of Edward and Elizabeth, who spent 81 years with the Megamics, aboriginal inhabitants of the protocosmos inside our globe. Returning once again to Verne's novel, on April 10, 1818, all the major universities of the United States and the military and political authorities receive a strange message from the captain mentioned by Dr. Clawbonny, quoting from the story, "To the whole world I declare the earth is hollow and habitable within, containing a number of solid concentric spheres, one within the other, and that it is open at the poles 12 or 16 degrees. I pledge my life in support of this truth, and am ready to explore the hollow if the world will support and aid me in the undertaking." End quote. Sims declares to his friends, All is hollow on this earth. Hair, the stalks of planets, and even our bones. Why would the earth escape this universal law? Various esoteric schools teach that the polar entrances lead towards cities of the underground world. Another American, Cyrus Reed Teed, picked up the idea of the hollow earth, but he squarely believed that we once lived inside the world, flattened against the inside wall of the globe. In 1894, he even founded a sect, Koreshism, which numbered some 4,000 adepts. The hollow earth theory was introduced into Germany by a young aviator named Bender, founder of the hollow earth movement. He believed that the sun and the moon were located at the very center of the earth. Some Nazi scientists and several writers later adopted these theories. All of this has the flavor of folklore, and we might think that the center of the earth must be subject to intolerable heat and pressure. In fact, though, this might not be true. We do know that pressure does not increase with depth, as the animals that dwell on the seafloor prove. Two recent hypotheses have been released on this subject. One was proposed by Canadian geologist Frank D. Adams and mathematician Louis V. King. According to these men, quite sizable cavities could exist inside the earth at depths ranging between 75,000 and 130,000 feet, a hypothesis confirmed by Dr. Adams' research on melted granite. Another theory was proposed by John Wheeler, the eminent physicist who collaborated with Niels Bohr on the theory of uranium fission. According to him, the earth could have been formed from a geon, a region in space of intense curvature where cosmic dust has been deposited and which could contain a veritable universe. Individuals as eminent as Admiral Byrd, the great polar explorer, believed in the possibility of a hollow earth whose center would be accessible at the pole. Indeed, when he was racing to the pole, he declared, quoting, "It is Jules Verne who is bringing me," end quote. Extraordinarily, we can see a dark zone that looks like an opening on some of the photos taken by NASA of the geographical North Pole. Could this be the entrance to the hollow earth? William Reed had no hesitation, writing, quoting, "The earth is hollow. The poles so long sought are phantoms. There are openings in the northern and southern extremities. In the interior are vast continents, oceans, mountains, and rivers. Vegetable and animal life are evident in this new world, and it is probably peopled by races unknown to dwellers on the earth's surface." End quote. Traditions across the globe, from Central Asia to the Americas, state something similar. This idea can be found at all times and in all places. Why couldn't there be a particle of truth in it? And should we deduce that Jules Verne adhered to such theories? Perhaps we should, for this idea was also predominant in Laura, or The Journey into the Crystal by George Sand, one of Verne's inspirations. In Sand's book, Nasius says, quoting, "This world we call the underground is the true world of splendor. Now, there certainly exists a vast portion of the surface still unknown to man, where some rent or deep declivity would permit him to descend to the region of gems and to contemplate under the open sky wonders you have seen in dreams. I am convinced that this volcanic rift, or rather crevasse, exists at the poles, that it is regular and appears in the form of a crater of several hundred leagues in diameter and several dozen leagues deep, and that, in short, the glow of the piles of gems visible at the bottom of this basin is the sole cause of the aurora borealis." End quote. Jules Verne maintains similar theories in other novels, besides Journey to the Center of the Earth and The Adventures of Captain Hatteras. In The Will of an Eccentric, Jules Verne, speaking of the Mammoth Caves in Kentucky, writes, quoting, "Such are the incomparable wonders of these caves that have surrendered only a portion of their secrets. Who knows what they may be holding in reserve for universal curiosity? And will we not one day discover an entirely extraordinary world in the entrails of the terrestrial globe?" End quote. In The Underground City, certain passages cannot help but bring to mind ancient legends that touch upon elder races that burrowed into the ground and never resurfaced. Quoting, "It was toward this time that Simon Ford's ancestors entered the entrails of Caledonian ground, never to re-emerge from father to son." End quote. Other passages are even more extraordinary, quoting, "Let's burrow to the center of the globe if we must." In the same novel, Jack says, "These beings who live in the abysses are not made like we are." The King of the World and the Black Powers. Any discussion of these theories of the underground must include Agartha and the King of the World. In fact, the posthumous work by St. Yves d'Alvedre, published in 1910 and entitled Mission of India, contains a description of a mysterious underground kingdom called Agartha. Ruling the mysterious people living in the cavities of the earth is a mysterious king of the world, whose envoys, the secret chiefs, are acting on the governments of the lands of the earth's surface. The best source concerning the enigmatic Agartha is the book by Fernand Ossendowski, Animal, Men, and Gods. A Buddhist prince declared to Ossendowski, quoting, "This kingdom is Agartha. It extends through every underground tunnel in the entire world. I heard a Chinese Lama scholar tell Bogdo Khan that ancient peoples who disappeared under the earth inhabit all the subterranean caverns of America. Traces of them can still be discovered on the world's surface. These subterranean peoples and races recognize the sovereignty of the King of the World. There is no great cause for wonder in all this. Once, 2 continents could be found in the 2 largest oceans of the East and West. They vanished beneath the waves, but their inhabitants moved into the underground kingdom." End quote. For Jean-Louis Bernard, the King of the World could well be connected to black magic. In this regard, he mentions the writings of Alexandra David Neal that report the existence of pseudo-lamas, a form of living dead who practice vampirism in remote lamaseries. These are old men who are dead, but who live in a state of artificial survival. They use their magic to attract lost travelers and persuade these visitors to allow themselves to be ritually slain so that the old men can obtain their vitality through osmosis during the course of a scientifically lengthened death agony. This places us somewhere between Dracula and Elizabeth Bathory. This King of the World is thus only King of the Maruts, or the living dead. Bernard adds that the Marxist world could have fallen under the domination of such Maruts, which would explain the heavy sadness and atone of the lands of the East. This opinion is shared by Jean-Paul Bourret, who wrote, quoting, "Still existing in the Transylvanian mountains is a lost Shambhala of vampirism, which is inaccessible to humans, but which is connected to the Shambhala of light by long underground passageways. This is no cause of surprise for initiates. It is connected in the same way that evil is tied to good by a network of correspondences that give wisdom its true face. Good and evil are one and the same. They share the same splendor, for truth destroys dualism." End quote. The fact remains that Ossendowski linked Agartha to the question of immortality. In his view, quoting, "The deep caverns are lit by a distinctive luminescence that permits the growth of grains and plants and gives people long and disease-free lives." End quote. And if we can trust the legends, the entrances to Agartha are not only to be found in Asia. Mont Saint-Michel and Broceliande Forest have also been suggested as likely spots where passages to this underground realm might be found. It would be no surprise to find that Gaston Leroux follows the same trail as Jules Verne. In Rouletabille and the Gypsies, he alludes to the hollow earth in connection with Wallachia. Interestingly, information imparted to us by René Gagnon is that the Bohemians once lived in Agartha. According to Gaston Leroux, it is the King of the World who makes the King of the Earth. Of course, All of this remains linked to vampirism. Quoting, "There cannot be a good celebration in the depths of the crypt if there is no blood." This is Walter Bosley, and I've just read a selection from The Secret Message of Jules Verne by MICHEL LAMY.